and what I think, as they are, probably as mistaken as they are, and kind of just wanting people to kind of respond and that. And, you know, if I put my foot in my mouth in every second sentence, I appreciate your patience.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that sounds great. I'm definitely glad to be patient here. I am similarly interested in like figuring out what's actually going on in these areas, more than like specifically arguing for a side.
Yeah.
If I try and like there's a thing that happens where someone will make an argument that you hadn't heard before, and
Yeah.
there's like an urge to be like why isn't that right? Let me find the
Yeah.
way that's not true. Where
Your mind immediately just kind of comes up with an idea on the spot, and you
yeah,
talk if this is an idea you've had for years, you know.
yeah, right. Where I think like I try personally to resist that urge, and when someone makes an argument that I hadn't heard before, to just be like, hold on, let me like think about that. Does that actually hold? Should I change my mind here?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there some place that where do you want to start? What's most interesting to you right now?
So I haven't read your whole thing. I read some of it, you
Yeah.
know.
I'm not expecting that you've read the
Yeah,
whole thing. It was 20 pages.
there's a lot there. Like, um, there was one bit that I kind of highlighted for myself, and I just kind of wanted to get a clarification.
Sure.
And I'll put up my hand immediately and say I would say Philios and other people are probably a lot better on the details of like epistemology and stuff, and you might even be much better than me on that. That was not the stuff that really originally interested me in any of either Deutsche stuff or AI or any of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very hard to make sense of what people mean usually when they start talking about that stuff, because
Okay.
people tend to have their own kind of like vocabs and their own jargons, and they use words in different ways and that when they talk
Sure
about
do.
epistemology. So you said something. So when you were talking about how all morals or goals that someone will have, when you ask them to explain that any particular moral or goal,
Mm-hmm.
they will explain it with reference to some other value or goal. And you gave a bunch of examples about how a person might try. You know, they you could say they'll talk about more, let's say, fundamental goals, like, so why are you pursuing this career? And you said, well, they might have a more fundamental goal about making money.
Mm-hmm.
Or you gave some examples, I can't remember off the top of my head, about people, let's say, changing their minds in some sense, that they start off with a certain kind of goal, and then they decide, well, actually I want another one, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this will be based on some more fundamental goal that they might have had, that they realized that they were actually aiming for the wrong thing given these more fundamental goals that they have. And there's a little line here towards the end of it, and I wanted to know exactly what you meant. You said,
Great. This
as
is
a
super helpful for me.
yeah, as a corollary of this necessary principle. Now you kind of had this in brackets and stuff towards the end, so I'm assuming it
Yeah,
wasn't like your main point. You know, I get that, but
yeah.
I think it's. So you said, as a corollary of this necessary principle, one can trace back the causal history of an agent's goals at any given time step to the quote unquote seed goals that the agent was born or built with.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I have some understanding of what you're saying there that I think sounds reasonable to me, which is that you can almost, if you could like wind back the clock on somebody and watch them during their life, and let's say see into their mind,
Mm-hmm.
that you could in some sense follow along backwards,
Yeah.
as they change their mind and all this kind of stuff, and you'll eventually arrive back at whatever stuff they had as a baby, you know. And like, that all seems fine to me, because the way I'm interpreting that is that you're like a spectator and you're just kind of watching, right?
Yeah.
But there's another way that I think I could interpret what you're saying, and I'm not sure if this is what you meant, which is that you're not so much just like a spectator watching them, you're actually like gonna logically work backwards. That you can almost like, so that person has spent their lifetime deriving, going from one goal to deriving another goal to deriving another goal to deriving another goal, and that you're going to essentially do that process backwards.
Yeah. So I think well, we'll have to be careful about this. I think I am making both claims that both
Yeah.
you could like play the tape in reverse and watch them do the reasoning. Okay, I guess one reason why you couldn't necessarily logically backtrack is because
Yeah.
it's possible that they've made mistakes. In fact,
That was
likely.
going to be my question. That was going to be my question, because obviously, if somebody has an unsound argument anywhere in their lifetime, there's an infinite number of false premises that sound argument could have come, or that unsound argument could have come from.
Right.
You know,
So yeah, so you start with a person's goals, and then you're like, all right, I'm going to logically backtrack. Yeah, and then like sooner or later you're going to come to a place where they've made some error.
yeah, and then you're stuck. You can't go, but you can't go farther back than that.
Well, you can still trace back, like you're like, all right, we flagged the error here, but we can still like trace back, these are the reasoning steps that they did. Unfortunately, everything past the error is not, like, it's no longer logically consistent. But we can still say, like, mechanically what happened. They made this error and then they continued reasoning in these ways. But this is like from the spectator position.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. That would, again, it assumes that you're kind of hopping out of the logic tree, and you're going to assume the position of a spectator, and you're going to almost like skip that bit, skip that error, and kind of highlight that as some kind of a black hole, and then just kind of follow along backwards, right? But if you're just going to like try and logically work backwards, the minute you get to an error, you're stuck.
Yeah, that seems right.
Yeah. So
I think a black hole is a little bit too strong. I think like you can say specifically what the error was. It wasn't just like, and then magic happened. You're like, then they made this confusion where they thought that this thing was the same as this thing, but in fact they're different things.
Yeah. Look,
okay.
I think we understand what we mean there. So I suppose, let me just, so when you said this, so it's kind of, now I'm assuming from my interactions with Philios, he's very much interested in the epistemology. I don't know if he read your thing or not.
He read some, but again, it was 20 pages. So
yeah, so I'm assuming he took issue. I'm on this stuff, but I'm assuming he took issue with this way of talking about morals and stuff, because it sounds like you're saying that morals, that the morality of people exists in some kind of like hierarchy of values, and that you can go, depending on your exact metaphor, you can go up the tree and go to some kind of ideal value up at the very top, or you can go down the tree to some more fundamental or foundational value at the bottom. And then once you have this foundational value, like everything else kind of gets like built on top of it, right? You can justify, and then you get down to some bottom.
Yeah, I could nitpick some of that phrasing there. Like I think that it is more like there are. So first of all, I'm not sure exactly what the bottom looks like. Like there's this section where I'm like, maybe it's cycles or maybe there's terminal goals. And so as it gets down, it gets like fuzzier in terms of like, I'm actually not sure how human psychology works, but here are some options that seem to me to be exhaustive of the space of possibilities. And it's not like the thing at the top of the tree, like you start at the fundamental things. Also, it's not, yeah, I'm not sure how nitpicky, how helpful these nitpicks are. I'm not sure that it's a tree. I think it is more like a graph, and that you might have multiple low level, like you might have, like, I value money and I value saving lives, and so I decide to become a doctor. And both of those are feeding into a single node. And then because I decided to be a doctor, like it seemed like going to med school is like a goal. Going to med school is a good thing to do because becoming a doctor is a good thing to do because I value money and saving lives. And also, like getting good grades in undergrad. And so it's not clearly. You can have goals that have multiple parents, and you can have goals that have multiple children.
Like, so would it be fair if I said that, look, regardless of whatever metaphor, whether it's a graph or a tree or whatever, you're essentially saying that that our morals are essentially derived. So one moral is derived from either one or more other morals that are at some deeper level, and then those morals are derived from other morals and stuff. Does
I
that
think,
make sense?
yeah, I think that is correct.
Yeah, and I know you have a little caveat in there at the end where, obviously eventually you get to a bottom and you don't really know what's going on there. So there might be some kind of cyclical, right?
Yeah.
I think that the introduction of cyclical, I don't know, I'm not a logician. I'm not some master philosopher. I think that there's got to be some kind of circular logic happening there then if you're going to bring in the possibility that your mind cycles between
Yeah.
these values.
So cycle's not necessarily like you're like, one moment I value X and then another moment I value Y. It's more like you ask, why do I value X? And you say, well, I value X because of Y. And then why do you value X? Or excuse me, why do you value Y? Well, because of X. And so
Yeah. Well,
it's
that
some
is
sort of,
circular logic, like,
yeah.
so I suppose you are kind of claiming at that point that at bottom, our brain or our mind is circular. It's engaging in some kind of circular logic. But okay, let me bring it into something a little bit more real. The
Yeah.
only way I think something like that can, like, so okay, can I just ask, did Philios take issue with this framing?
So I don't want to attribute too much to him because
Okay,
it was hard to read the whole thing, and I gave you guys
right.
like less
Okay,
than 12 hours, but he
okay.
did not take issue. He at least so far did not take issue with it.
Okay. Well, my understanding, and again, as I said many times,
Yep.
epistemology is not my wheelhouse, really. So I'm kind of out of my depth.
Yeah, that's
My
fine.
my understanding is that, you know, any kind of knowledge, including moral knowledge, any kind of ideas that are in our mind, they're
Mhm.
not derived from anything. Human minds don't derive any ideas from other ideas, right? So this building up this tree of ideas being derived from another, and it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because you do eventually get to a bottom. And
Mhm.
the question is, okay, well, where did the bottom get derived from? Now,
Yeah.
you might say, in reality, when it comes to humans at least, the bottom has to be something in our genes or something like that, that it comes from our genes. Like we start off with some base moral drives that are somehow encoded in our genes. Because if you don't say that, well, then my answer is, where the hell did this bottom come from? How did it get into your mind?
Yeah, I think that is a correct critique. I am somewhat like, it's also possible that it's totally random. Um, but I
Okay.
but yeah, I want to be agnostic about whether or not it's genetic, as opposed to, like, there are some initial conditions. There's some foundational thing, but it might be strongly influenced by prenatal conditions in the womb. Um,
Okay.
but
Okay. Well, okay. Well, what I would just say is that I think that, and again, this isn't really the most formal argument, but I would say that that might sound somewhat plausible when you put it like this. But when you just look at a newborn child and you look at what a newborn child wants,
Mhm.
and you try and figure out its morals, it seems to just have some, like, I don't understand how you could get from this child essentially crying over it's hungry or something like that. That could be a genetically encoded want, right?
I do think that is one of the genetically encoded wants.
And that's fine. I actually think that that's true as well, but I don't really think that all that matters. I don't think it really matters if it's some kind of a foundation or not, right?
Mhm.
Um, the the I don't know how you get in a lifetime of derivations. I don't know how you get from something like the really basic stuff that we know babies want, which is like food and, I don't know, hugs and kisses, right? To, I want to be a doctor, right? Like, I'm not seeing. I find it remarkably implausible that you could go from that stuff to some kind of tree of logic, all the way to, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be, okay, well, I'm kind of picking very complicated examples to make it
Sure.
sound even more ridiculous. If you just something as simple as, I want to be a school teacher or something. Like, it's,
I think, yeah, I think we could also do it with an astronaut. Okay,
yeah,
so that seems like a productive place to go. So there's two things I would say to that. We could just go through. So first of all, yeah, I guess I'll say three things. So one, I of course don't know in like full detail how it works.
yeah,
Like we would need to pay a lot of attention to the development of probably a large number of human beings to watch in detail how one thing leads to another. I do feel like this is pretty plausible, and I can tell a story that I'm not sure that the details of the story are right, but like here's the gist of how I think this works. So that's one thing that we could do next. Those were things 1 and 2. The third thing is, I'm curious, if you don't think that it works like that, how else could it work? And that's another track we could take.
That's the epistemology.
Okay.
I can tell you what the Popperian idea is, and I can tell you that when I read about it, it makes loads of sense to me.
Okay.
But I don't know if in a conversation I do the best job of articulating it, right? So my basic understanding is that this notion of the human ideas consist of this, essentially, like, there's beliefs and we have to justify those beliefs, and depending on how well we justify those beliefs, we can assess whether or not they're true. Right? So you can have some set of true premises, and those premises justify a conclusion, and we believe in that conclusion, and then that conclusion becomes some kind of piece of knowledge that we have, right? Yeah?
Sure. That sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, so my understanding is that Popper would have said that all of that is wrong, right? That knowledge, for a start anyway, it doesn't consist of belief at all.
Yep.
Because we can have knowledge that exists in books, and it can exist in all kinds of other forms. You can put knowledge in photographs and et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't have to exist in the form of a belief in a person's mind. And the other thing would be, your knowledge anything that you would claim to know can't possibly be justified, because any justification you give will itself have to be justified. And so you will just keep going and keep going. You'll be in an infinite regress, right? So anything that you would try and, let's say you tried to pull the brakes on that, and you said, well, hang on, maybe we've just got some kind of basic premises, some kind of I don't know, what are the other ways people talk about this stuff, like a priori assumptions or a basic axioms or something, you know?
Yep.
The problem becomes, well, unless you can answer the question of why is that your foundation, or why is that where you're pulling the brakes and not somewhere else?
Yeah.
Unless you can answer that question, then it's not justified. The whole tree isn't justified, right?
Yep.
So
I agree with that.
Right. So the next thing is, people would say, well, there's some kind of way of inferring or inducing, or this is where there's some kind of inductivism goes on. So maybe we can't deductively justify all of our stuff, but maybe we can use some kind of principle of induction to generalize about what we think we know, and to something that we can be maybe not 100% certain, but 90% certain, or
okay,
95% certain. And again, as far as, again, this is where it gets hairy for me. That can't be right, because there's no principle of induction or whatever, as far as that I'm aware of, that actually makes any sense. So usually there's the famous example is how do we know that the sun is going to come up tomorrow, right? So the idea is, well, we've observed that the sun has come up every morning, and so we take our limited observations, which is the sunrises that we've seen, and then we generalize to a general theory. Well, the sun rises in the morning, and then as we continue to observe the sun rising, we become more and more and more confident in our theory that the sun will rise tomorrow, that's true. Right? Okay. Yeah. So
I'm not sure that I would consider that good reason. So I do think that inductive reasoning is possible, and humans do it all the time. Right. I'm not sure that it's good inductive reasoning that the more times you see the sun rise, the more confident you should be that the sun will rise tomorrow. But
I to be honest, as I said, this is one of these things. It makes lots of sense to me when I read it, and etc. But I don't have it quite integrated in my head. Yeah. I think you would learn more to speak to somebody else about the details of this kind of inductivism and stuff. Because I've only My problem that I'm facing is I actually started with Deutsch and I liked his books,
Yeah.
but most of the technical stuff about inductivism and deductivism and hypothetical deductivism, all this weird stuff, that's all in Popper's books. And I'm only like one or two books into that, like, you
All
know,
right.
so
All right.
I think maybe other people might be more helpful for you
Sure.
there.
All right. But right now I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
Okay. So currently, so again, we can trace out how I think that you get from babies being hungry to wanting to be astronauts.
Mhm.
I also hear you making a claim, which is like, well, you're positing something that is like a hierarchy from some fundamental things to some like more present, less fundamental things. There's a problem, which is how do you justify the things at the bottom? You have to, if you at some point are like, yeah, I'm just not going to justify this anymore, then
Mhm.
the whole tree or whole graph stops being justified.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, we've justified none of this. What's the, like, how are we any better than we started from?
Yeah.
And one solution to this is, well, maybe we can justify it with induction, but induction has its own problems.
Mm.
That's my summary of the things we just covered in the past 5 minutes. Does that
Okay.
cover the
I
base?
think so. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so where do you want me to go with that? So I'll say
Well, I can bring it to another part of your article that it maybe is. It might take us away a little bit from the epistemology stuff. I don't know. Maybe whatever. I'll let you.
I'm happy talking about whatever feels most interesting to you.
Yeah.
I will say that I agree that if you have some things that are unjustified, your whole tree logically is as justified as your unjustified things at the bottom. And
Yeah.
also, I think that practically that isn't an issue.
Right. Well, okay. So the way the a Popperian or someone would get around this problem, the solution that they would put forward to this notion of you can't justify anything, you can't have these foundations, is just that, well, then we just don't need to justify anything. We don't need foundations, right? All we need to say is that we don't derive the idea that comes from our head from another idea. What happens is we encounter a problem, right? And you might say, well, what's a problem? A problem is when whatever theories are already in your mind can't account for whatever it is you've just come across. That could be an argument from another person, or it could be that you think you just saw somebody disappear, or you saw, or you're looking at a mirage in a desert and you're like, but there can't be water out here. Or it could be that you want coffee, but there's no coffee in the cupboard. So you're like, I need coffee. That's a problem, right? So there's the web of theories that's already in your mind is in some way not sufficient for whatever you've just encountered. So you start with a problem.
Okay. I want to ask some questions to follow up on that. A problem, so just paraphrasing thing first, a problem is some conflict between ideas in your mind, or perhaps a conflict between ideas in your mind and some new sense data, which I guess are just a different
Okay.
kind of idea.
So yeah. So all sense data is itself interpreted through the theories that are in your mind,
I agree with that.
right? Yeah. So in a sense, what you're saying is that if I'm being a bit more short about it, a problem is when one idea in your head is in conflict with another one, right?
Okay.
So it could be an idea. So one of the ideas. So if I try and incorporate the kind of sense data thing, it's like a problem happens. One particular kind of problem happens where there's an idea in your mind. So you're in a desert. You that's an idea is in your mind. You're like, I'm in a desert.
Yep.
And then next thing you turn around and there's an oasis in front of you. But
Yep.
in your mind, you're sitting there going, but there can't be an oasis in front of me. And so you've got all kinds of theories about what you should be seeing, about what you should be observing, and what you can observe. And then you see something and you're like, okay, that makes no sense. And so you've got a problem now. Right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Or even simpler, like you think there's coffee in the cupboard. You really think there's coffee in the cupboard, and then you open the cupboard and there isn't coffee there.
Yeah.
So you something you didn't expect to see.
Yeah. So both of those examples make sense to me, and they both start with something that you didn't expect, or they both like the shape of the problem is there's something that you don't expect, or there's something that's in conflict with your understanding of what's happening in this situation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um,
So
so
we start with a problem,
mhm,
and then what we do is our mind, it doesn't derive a solution from anything. It
mhm,
just it conjectures. It creates an idea. This is why you'll hear crit rats constantly going on about creativity,
yeah,
because it's their holy grail about where all kinds of ideas come from, right? So it will completely guess an idea, and this guess is not justified ever.
yep,
And what will happen then is you will then subject that guess to criticism. So you'll now that kind of criticism can be anything really. It can be that you'll ask yourself, okay, does this make sense? Does what I thought there was coffee there. Why did I think there was coffee there? I thought there was coffee there because I was planning. I remember saying to myself yesterday, I need to pick up coffee when I was going home from work yesterday. And then do I remember doing that? Actually, do you know what? No, I don't. So my mind has come up with all these ideas about, okay, I forgot to go get coffee when, and then I forgot that I didn't do that. You know, does that kind of make sense? It's a bit of an awkward example, like, but
all of this makes sense to me so far. I could translate it somewhat into the jargon that I'm more familiar with, but all of it is consistent with how I think about things.
yeah. So none of it. So you haven't like derived one idea from another one.
Mhm,
You've come up against something, and you can't make sense of it, whether it's an argument or whatever, and we'll call that a problem. And then
mhm,
your mind immediately starts to create ideas to fix the problem, solve the problem, make it go away, you
mhm.
know. Um, and these ideas, because they're not justified, that means that they can be wrong, you know, and we can never know in what ways they're wrong, right? And we can never know
Well,
in what way.
we can identify errors, right?
Yeah, well, we can. It's the same story. So we can try to identify errors, and when we think we found an error and we think it's solved our problem, that's great. We'll go about our day, but we
Yeah,
might actually be wrong. You
yeah,
know,
we
it
might
might
be
not
mistaken about having been
solve the
mistaken in the
problem.
first place. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it kind of applies to itself. You
Yep.
know. So this is again where you'll hear crit rats constantly talking about fallibility, right? So nothing is justified. We're fallible. So this is why criticism is so important in the epistemology.
So saying nothing is justified seems so okay. So first of all, yep, it seems right to me that we're fallible for any given set of ideas. There might be some mistake there.
Mhm.
And like we're going to encounter like new ideas both from sense data from the environment, although I agree that sense data is always filtered through theory
Oh,
laden, is always
theory.
theory laden.
Yeah, yeah,
Although I still want to be able to refer to like I have abstract ideas, and also I have like the ideas that are coming to me from like this environment, and like I'm looking at this face that's your face right now, and that
yeah,
seems like a sort of different, like maybe the fundamentally the same type signature, but I want to have a category of, you know,
yeah. Yeah. I think we mean the same kind of thing. I think so anyway.
yeah,
It's just a matter of what you're used to thinking in a certain kind of way, like, you know. So,
yeah,
but
um,
so long as we both accept the idea that sense data is meaningless. So first of all, sense data is not ever passively received; it's only ever sought out. And then secondly,
yes,
it's meaningless until it's interpreted, and you can only interpret it based on the theories that are in your head
um, yes,
already.
I do think both of those things.
Yeah.
The key word. So there's a theory of neuroscience that goes by predictive processing or predictive coding,
Mm.
which describes in technical detail that is sort of famously hard to understand exactly how this process happens and how you have a bunch of neurons that are um, receiving sense data in a theory laden way. In fact, receiving is not quite right. They're actually there's flows going both directions. There you have sort of abstract ideas about what's happening. There's your current theory about what's happening, which is pushing information in a downward stream. Um,
Mm.
and then there's also sense data coming up in an upward stream, and you're constantly comparing them, and so and specifically when they don't match at many different neural levels, what a critical rationalist would call a problem, I think.
Okay.
That's that the brain literally draws attention to those areas, and it's like, wait,
Oh,
I was expecting to see a coffee cup there. There's no
yeah.
coffee cup. There's a conflict between my predictions or my theory
I'm
and
expecting.
the ideas coming up from the bottom.
Yeah.
Then this is the details are sort of probably more complicated than are necessary, but
Right. Yeah.
but like all of this is consistent with my current understanding of how brains work.
Right. Okay. Well. Okay. Obviously, I'm not a computer scientist.
Yeah.
I will just highlight one last thing. The problems are not just to do with expectations.
Mhm.
So a problem could happen whereby problems have happened for you and me in this conversation, probably mostly me, where like I think something, but then you say something to me, and what you've just said doesn't fit with what I think.
Yep.
Right? That's not really like an expectation because it's just that something I've received some information, I've interpreted some information, and my interpretation of that information doesn't fit with the information that's already in my head. Does that make
Sure.
sense? I just
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to. It's just a little quibble, but it's just I want to head off any misconception that a problem can only come about through expectations.
So I guess I'm expecting that those are ultimately isomorphic, that you can have a, yeah, give me a moment to consider that. You're like, this doesn't fit. So I think, so my best understanding of how it all works is that at bottom, your ideas are ultimately about predictions or expectations. And that theories are at the neural level defined in terms of what you predict will happen. I'm not confident about that. I know folks in the crit ras sphere don't think that that's the right way to think about it, and that's
No.
the wrong sort of ontology. I think that when you're like, I have some idea, and Eli just said something, and they don't match, that we can reformulate this as I had some expectation about what was going to happen in a very broad sense, and that expectation was violated. I don't know if that detail matters here.
I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be very interesting to try and
Okay.
resolve that. Especially not with me. Like, but
Okay.
so, I'm trying to just kind of maybe explain the reason I kind of kept this line of the conversation up is to explain maybe why you will hear crit rats constantly bring everything back to creativity. They will constantly bring everything back to criticism because if nothing is ever justified, then all we have is just encountering problems and creating new ideas and then criticizing those ideas until we at least think we've solved the problem.
Yep.
That's
Okay.
that's all we've got. All we've got are creating and criticizing, or as Popper put it, conjectures and refutations. That's all we've got.
Yeah, so I have to shift the way I'm looking at things a little bit, but I think I basically agree with that.
Okay. Well, you see, the thing is, now again, this is something to go over with somebody who understands this stuff maybe a bit more.
Yep.
As far as I'm aware, you can't agree with that and think that any kind of induction happens in a person's mind. Okay. Now, I'm not the person to clear that up or whatever, but that's something maybe to.
So I think the bridge is that I would say that I think the bridge is, I would need to think more about this, and maybe you're right that I should talk with someone who has more technical expertise here, that the thing that a crit rat would call conjecture, I would call an inductive inference, where you're like, what is my best guess about what's happening here? Let me generate a guess. This guess is informed based on prior experience. And it like the creativity isn't magical. It's you come up with better guesses than random, and you come up with
Right.
better guesses than random
Okay. Yeah.
because
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think this might actually be something that is a little bit interesting, which is just this notion about how our guesses are not random. They seem to be at least some bit tailored towards solving a problem. So if I realize there's no coffee in the cupboard, my mind does not immediately just go, well, maybe some squirrels broke in and took it. Do you know, like that
Yep.
doesn't happen, right? So the guesses that do come up seem to be confined in some way, right? They're or not okay, they're non-random, right?
Yep.
Um
And
and
I
think,
claim that they're non-random because of inductive processes in the brain.
okay, what I have in my head right now, and I have no idea if this makes any sense,
Sure. Okay,
is
we're gonna find out.
is that what's happening is actually a kind of unconscious conjecture and refutation process that you're just not aware of. So that there's some kind of, let's say, startup conjecture and refutation that goes on that essentially rules out whatever random shit your mind came up with. And so then eventually a somewhat sensible and already kind of criticized idea, it bubbles up and appears in your mind.
Okay, so I think that something like that is happening, but you have to ask the question of, is the thing that you're starting from a random seed, like if there's an unconscious series of conjecture and criticism happening, that just sort of passes the buck. Like when you're like, all right, so I have this conscious conjecture that comes to mind.
Yeah.
It seems like pretty good. It's probably that I forgot to buy the coffee and not that squirrels stole the coffee.
Yeah.
And then you're like, all right, so how did that conjecture come to mind? You're like, well, there was an unconscious process of
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
and you're like, all right, so where did that conjecture in the unconscious process come from? You're like, well, there's another process. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think so it might be possible that in fact you do start with a random seed. You're like you start by generating literally random noise, and then you criticize that random noise, and you sort of use a kind of genetic process, like a genetic algorithm that is pruning away bad explanations where bad explanations need to be technically defined, until you get to conjectures that are reasonable enough that they get promoted to the conscious mind. I think that might be possible.
It could be. I don't know. And I suppose this is one of the reasons as well why, like I think one of the big issues here is that, okay, from crit rat perspective, we would say that we know, and when a crit rat says that they know, they don't mean we're certain. They don't mean that our knowledge, that this is a justified piece of knowledge. They just mean this is the best I've got so far.
Yeah.
Right. So they would say that we know that the only way this kind of knowledge could possibly get into a person's mind is that that person's mind created it, right? So there's some creativity algorithm that's there, but we just don't know how it works. We have no idea how it works. It could be that it starts off with random noise and it's some kind of evolutionary thing there, and it prunes away. But the problem is, from the crit rat perspective, is that we know that that algorithm exists, and we know that that's where the knowledge comes from. We just have absolutely no idea how it works.
Okay,
And that's
so
why we can't program it.
so that makes sense, except that I think I know how it works, at least in broad strokes. I
But
think
you
it's
see,
not a
no,
complete mystery.
right. Well, if we knew how it worked, we would already have an AGI. We would already be able to program an AGI, right?
Well,
so
approximately, like you might like even if you know the basic mechanisms that you need of like lift and thrust and like the mechanics of aerodynamics to build an airplane, there might still be like some practical problems of like, well, I need enough wood to start with. Like, where do I get the wood? And so forth. I think also I think once you have the basic theory of aerodynamics, you well, my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
can you still hear me? Yeah. I can't hear you. I'm not sure if you can hear me or if there's a delay.
I can hear you. Here we go. All right, this should be better.
Okay.
I agree that in principle, so in the same way, in principle, once you've discovered the like how aerodynamics works, you're sort of like all set to build an airplane, but you still have some practical difficulties to work out of like getting the materials and probably solving a bunch of smaller problems, like, you know, we need the engine to be like light enough that the wings can carry it. So like if the engine's too heavy, then it's sort of not practical. There's sort of like a bunch of smaller, more parochial problems.
Right.
I think that in very, very broad strokes, not in not in enough detail, but in very broad strokes, understand how intelligence / creativity works, and that given if we solved all the little parochial problems, yes, we could build an AGI. And that the fact that there isn't AGIs right now is not because so again, so I might be very wrong about this. It's possible that we are like, it's very hard to know before you've built a thing if you have all of the necessary theory to make it work.
So can I just, sorry, I don't mean to cut across you, but I just want to get in a picture.
Yeah.
What kind of practical things are in the way? So we won't even need, maybe we do, but like, we don't even really need to get back into like how you think like creativity and stuff works. Let's say you're right? How you think it works is how it works. What are the practical barriers?
I think the biggest one is so again, I want to caveat this whole part of the conversation with I'm quite unconfident.
Right. Okay.
And
fair, that's fine.
There are lots of holes in my understanding here, and I'm putting forth a posit of my guess about how it works, but I'm very uncertain, much more uncertain than I am about some other things that we're talking about here.
Okay.
But the biggest thing is not enough compute. That as we currently know how to run something like an AGI program, I think there in over time we will discover more and more efficient ways to do it. But basically, it is plausible to me. I'm not confident that this is the case, but it is plausible to me that basically there are algorithms that exist today that if you trained them on enough hardware with enough training data, but mostly hardware and training time, would be sufficient to produce an AGI. Again, I'm not confident about that, but.
So you think what exactly? That this algorithm has just so many computations in it that what? Is it that the computers that we have right now aren't fast enough, or that they don't have enough memory, or?
It's not memory or speed exactly. It's more like the number of computations that go into training a model in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a couple of things. So if we accept that humans have it, right? People, human beings, we have this algorithm in our brain.
Yep, some version of it.
Right, we have some version of it. Okay, I mean, yeah, fair enough. That's worth highlighting. We know so little about creativity. We don't even know exactly how, if it can be improved. If you can have, you could have an AI where their creativity is like half as good as ours, or maybe there's an AI where the creativity is 1,000 times better than ours. We don't know. We have no idea about.
I mean, I would be shocked if there were exactly one kind and there's no variations. And
well, maybe, but I'm just saying that we don't know. We really know so little about it that there's no point even really speculating. We'll just flag that that's a possibility, right? But we know that humans have some version of it, right?
Yep.
Which means that our brains as computers can run it, right? Now, again, so the principle of universality stuff comes in here as far as I can see.
Yep.
Right. So my understanding, and again, I'll copy what you're saying, very unsure here. My understanding of the principle of universality, if we talk about it in just pure computer theory, it's that everything that is computable by a Turing machine, right? Or a Turing computer, right? But if we translate that into physics, the Turing machine is a physical object, right?
Yep.
It's a possible physical object. So what
I mean, a Turing machine is infinite, which makes it
right, okay,
hard to
but
be a physical.
yeah,
But
it has infinite memory, but the point is that in terms of as an object and how it works and the way it carries out or executes algorithms and stuff, that if you just give it enough memory and enough time, it can do anything you want it to do, right?
yep.
The the point in terms of physics is that if we think about computation as a process where we represent like abstract entities and their relationships, such as like integers, in physical objects and their motion, right? That's what computation is, right? So when you take the principle of
the electrons, like the emotion of electrons.
exactly, but if you think about like old computers, they were electromechanical, so that was actual motion. I know now we use like transistors and stuff, so they're just switching on and off, and that's fine, right?
Yep. Same basic thing.
Yeah, same basic thing. If you take that and then you can actually translate, and I think this is what Deutsch did, I think so, you can translate the principle of universality of computation into a theory about physics, where you say, well, what it's telling us is that there is a physical object, the Turing machine, whose set of all possible motions can simulate all possible motions of every other physical object in the universe.
Yep.
Right? So what that tells us is that there is no object in the universe whose motion can be transferred into information, and where that information can then be encoded in the motion of this Turing computer. There's no object where that can't be done, right?
I mean, modulus space constraints.
Modulus memory and modulus speed. Yeah. So
which might be practical for some specific things. Like it's hard for a human mind to simulate the whole
all the time. It's practical all the time in the sense that obviously, like you said, real physical objects have limitations in terms of their memory and that, right? But what it means here is that if the motion of every physical object can be translated into the same kind of information that can be processed by a Turing machine, that means that every single object has that the kind of computation that is available for every physical object is the same, right? So any object every kind of object that can be a computer is doing the same kind of thing.
Yep, I agree with that.
Does that all make sense, right? So then what you're left with at all of that, if that's true, then that means that the only thing in principle that's different between any one computer and another is how much speed they have and how much memory they have.
I mean, also the programs that they're running.
Right, but that's a software difference, right? So that I should clarify that. In terms of hardware, all you're left with is speed and memory.
Let me think about that for a second. And on the face of it, I agree. But I mean, it is also true that you can have, for instance, specialized chips. Like you can have ASICs that are much more efficient at doing some computations than others. They're designed to do specific computations, and they're still general in the sense that if you want to, you could do any kind of computation on them, but they're sort of predisposed to. It's much easier to do some kinds of computations than others. Like, I don't know, GPUs is a classic example. GPUs are chips that are designed to just do matrix multiplications, which are great for video games and great for machine learning. And if you wanted, you could also run my computer, like the CPU of my computer, on a GPU, but that would be sort of a silly way to do it because it's not well designed for doing those kinds of computations.
Okay.
Okay.
But, as I said, okay, I'll let you finish. Excuse me.
Yeah, but it still holds that if you had enough GPUs, like you had enough memory to make up for the difference in the specialization of their architecture, this would be equivalent to a CPU. Like it's
Right.
still, you can
Okay.
still translate between them.
Okay. But I will defer to someone like yourself or other people who know
Okay.
things about computers. Like, so I'm coming at this from a totally like kind of theoretical layman approach, right?
Sure.
So my understanding is that what you said before you mentioned that stuff about the chips anyway is definitely true. That the ways they differ is their speed, their memory, but most importantly, they can obviously differ massively in what software is running on them.
Mhm.
And I think this is more relevant to your concern about the AIs, right? Because I think what you're imagining, I think I can't tell sometimes if you're kind of like mixing a kind of hardware slash speed problem with the idea that we could get better and more efficient software running on these computers, right?
I may be playing fast and loose. I think that
Yeah.
both of those are a way that you can get existential risk.
Right, but
Yeah,
go
they're
ahead.
sort of separate problems, but
Yeah,
they
they
produce
are. They're
the
very separate.
yeah.
So it's entirely possible that you could have some AGI, right? And we could just, let's take something simple like multiplication, right? So it's entirely possible that some AGI could develop some new kind of algorithm, new way of multiplying things that's just way faster. So there's much less computations involved in doing multiplication in whatever way it's come up with, right?
Hold on,
So
can you
then,
give me 1 moment? Actually, I just need to respond to this. Um. Okay, sorry. Continue. I
right.
missed
So
the last. I don't know, 30 seconds.
right. So if we take an example, if we're gonna, if I try and dig down on this problem of what if an AI gets better software than
Mhm.
us, right? And an AGI. I think the hardware thing is more of an AI kind of concern where it's like, okay, you're going to have an AI that does the same stuff that we do, but it does it 1,000 times faster, and maybe it's going to do something really, really bad if we don't keep an eye on it. But an AGI is a software. Any problems that an AGI could cause for us will be a software problem, right? It'll be that it will come up with ideas, ways of doing things, ways of computing things that we don't have, right?
Yeah.
And that will allow it to do things faster than us, better than us, and things that we could never even imagine being possible, right?
Yep.
Does
Although
that
all that seems right. I'm a little. I'm not sure why. It seems like also the problem can be made worse with hardware. You're like, here's an algorithm that is more creative than humans are, and also it's running 1,000 times faster because it just has more computer resources.
right? Well, you see, so I think there's a couple of assumptions that get smuggled in there, which is that this algorithm, like we know so little about this creativity algorithm. I'm not even sure we know exactly what level of integration it will have with. Is it something that we'll just be able to install and run on a computer? I don't know. You know, I don't know enough about how computers work. I don't know enough about how these like so.
Well, so again, you were just talking about the universality of computation. Surely you
Yeah.
think that in principle we could run it on a computer. Are you
Oh
talking
yeah. No. We definitely can. We definitely can run it on a computer. But what
okay.
I'm saying is that, like, it's not obvious to me that the speed at which a creative algorithm will like actually come up with new and good creations is necessarily 100% tied to the speed of the hardware, right? Because
Uh
that's an awkward way of phrasing this. I'm aware.
okay. I think you're making so I disagree with that, although I think you're
Okay.
making a broader point. So maybe you want to move on to your broader point.
Well, what I'm trying to say here is that I don't think it's known
Mhm.
that, like you said, we could just have one kind of creative algorithm in our mind. We don't know that when we somehow manage to code some new creative algorithm, is that algorithm going to be 1,000 times faster at doing what it's doing, or will it be like, 1,000 times slower? And okay, let's say we can put it on a computer that we have, right? And let's take your problem of, well, it's now running on hardware that's 1,000 times faster than our brains. That's a bad thing, right? So even if it is 1,000
Oh,
times
it might be a
slower,
bad thing. It's a
yeah, it
bad
might
thing if
be,
it's hostile to us,
right? So
but
it
that's
we
assuming
can't.
not some other stuff.
So in my head, that translates to almost like the way Elon Musk talks about the AI issue, which is like a bandwidth issue.
Yeah.
Because we will also have access to these computers that run at whatever speeds and stuff, and so we can put our ideas in this computer and it'll be fine. But the issue seems to be that this AI will be in the computer.
Mhm.
It won't have to go through an interface of keys on a keyboard and clicking on a mouse and stuff like that. It will just in some way encode stuff onto the computer, right? So like the flow of information, the feedback between this creative algorithm that's on the computer will be much, much greater than the feedback between us and our hardware.
Okay. This conversation, I think, clarified how. So I'm familiar with Elon Musk's view. It has seemed kind
Yeah.
of silly to me, but
Yeah.
I think if you think that there is no fundamental difference in algorithms between intelligences, that's like
Right.
all intelligences are the same amount of creative,
Mm.
which I don't think is true. But if you
No,
did
but it doesn't
that,
even have to be. It
yeah,
doesn't have to be. Let's say you have an algorithm that's half as fast. It's half as crap, right? So it's only half as good.
yeah,
You put an algorithm that's half as good on this laptop that
yeah,
I'm currently talking to you on. You still have this issue where it's got this amazing bandwidth that we don't
yeah,
have,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
Hypothetically, right? But okay, now what I'm saying is, as far as I can tell, now I don't know. I'm basically parroting people who I'm assuming know more about this stuff than me.
Sure.
There's all kinds of assumptions here about the order in which all of this stuff gets invented. So it's entirely possible that by the time such an algorithm is written, that that humans have developed ways where we're no longer just interacting with computers via keyboards and mice, that we have something like Elon Musk's Neuralink or some create something even crazier where we are almost plugged in as well, right? Which I suppose kind of makes sense. It seems plausible. Again, we don't know very much, so speculating doesn't get us very far. It seems plausible that it's only as we try and integrate our minds with a computer that we might stumble upon the way to actually write a mind into a computer, right? Write one of these kinds of algorithms. Now, again,
yeah, it's possible.
it's possible. No, I don't know. This the main thing I think to make clear about all of this though is that the main problem with an AGI, or the main potential problem, is that it would come up with some new piece of software, right? And this software is going to be better than whatever software we have.
Yep.
And as you say, what happens if it applies this amazing new creativity algorithm to maximizing paper clips or some, I know that's the famous.
I mean, that's intentionally a hypothetical example. We don't expect it. No one actually expects we're going to end up with a paperclip maximizer, but we might end up with something similarly that seems similarly absurd to us.
And hostile.
Yeah.
Okay, can I ask this question, right? Because
yep.
Because I think we're getting on to the I hope this is interesting. I hope this is helping with stuff. I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of throwing shit out there. But I don't get, it doesn't make sense to me that you could conceive of this entity being super intelligent, or, so it's really clever. It can come up with all kinds of scientific ideas, new technologies, new algorithms. And yet it would, why would it still be like insane? How could it be so intelligent and so stupid at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is sort of like the core claim that I need to make. the thing that so I'm not sure if this will land. We can try like a number of different tacks on how to explain this. The key claim that I'm making is that our morality is contingent on some things that humans assume about what is good. There are some things that almost all humans agree are good, that are not universal.
Right.
And when we are making moral arguments, we rely on those assumptions of goodness. So, for instance, if I certainly don't want humans to suffer, and I wish for other humans to be free of suffering, and that's like pretty axiomatic. Like I that's sort of like a fairly fundamental in my moral reasoning. Like I'm like, is some policy good or bad? I am one of the main things I'm considering is does it reduce or increase human suffering? But if we posit a person or an individual who does not share that axiom, who doesn't care whether or not other humans suffer, who definitely understands and recognizes that they suffer and just is like, yeah, I don't care about that, like some sort of sociopath, I can't. There is not an argument that I can give. And now I'm saying a thing here that will require some caveats. There's not some argument that I could give that will necessarily convince them that actually they should care about other humans.
Right. So can we maybe? No, you finish your point. Sorry, I thought.
No, I think your questions will be helpful.
Right. So, okay. I don't know if I really want to dig into the moral philosophy. I don't think avoiding human suffering needs to be an axiom. Mm-hmm. That would be a conclusion in my moral worldview.
Okay.
But I don't think there's much to be gained, because I think we both just agree anyway. Humans shouldn't suffer, right? So it doesn't really matter.
I mean, it does matter because insofar as if you can justify it universally to all minds, I would change my mind about whether or not there's AI risk. Then I'd be like, okay, great. It seems like we can just make an AI and we can persuade it to have morals.
Right. So so we take an AI and it's an AGI. Like, can we assume if one of us uses the term AGI or AI, we're talking about AGI, right?
So that's right. I am referring to AGI.
Yeah. So let's say you got your AGI, and okay, we'll just go with the ridiculous thing, right? So it wants to make paper clips for whatever reason. So it's some kind of a genius, but it still wants to make paper clips.
Yep.
But let's say we don't go for the full doom and gloom. It doesn't want to turn us into paper clips. Maybe it just wants to turn stuff that we need to survive into paper clips, right? So we'll kind of remove some of the horrible moral complexities there. So it becomes almost like a fight over resources, right? So it wants all the resources to make paper clips, and we want resources to do whatever it is we're doing. I don't know, skydiving or something, right?
Well, first and foremost, food.
Yeah. Okay.
We want it for food. It wants it for paper clips.
Right.
We're fundamentally at war.
So we have a conflict. It has something it wants. We have something we want. So I see this in my head then as totally analogous to two people fighting over or disagreeing over what is the best use of whatever resource it is. So you got two people, you've got a field in between them. One of them wants to use the field for growing tomatoes or something, and the other one wants to put livestock in the field, right? So the idea that the default scenario is that this AGI, that it will somehow logic its way into a state where it goes, I am going to murder you if you don't let me do what I want, is like assuming that the default with these two farmers is, or not farmers, but people, is that one of them is going to work themselves up into a murderous rage over the tomatoes, right?
Yep.
And I would say it's the reason that doesn't happen with the two people. It's not that they have some kind of basic axiom of humans shouldn't suffer, right? I think it's just that you can easily ask one guy, if one guy is working himself up into a murderous rage, right? Now let's hypothetically say that he somehow stops for a second, you know, right? But so he stops for a second, and the other guy, rather than running away, calmly asks him for an argument, right? But he says, okay, if it's okay for you to work yourself up into a murderous rage and murder me so that you can get your tomatoes, why can't I work myself up into a murderous rage and kill you for the livestock? And I think you could ask this question of this apparently super intelligent AGI, and you could say, well, what's so different about us, right? So you're kind of assuming that this AGI will have an opinion of itself that it is qualitatively different or more important than us, which is why it will just want to override our values no matter what.
I don't think that's exactly right. But yeah, so first of all, I agree that the situations are very analogous. There's some resource that two people are fighting over. One thing I do want to note is I do think outside of civilization, the default thing that happens is one of them tries to fight to the, like they fight to the death over the resource.
Right.
Like in the
But
state
we're
of
not. But we're talking about a super intelligent computer. Remember, we're not talking about two tribal Indians. We're talking about this one of the smartest beings in the universe.
Yep.
And us, civilization.
Yeah. So I think the key thing is that one important reason why people don't fight to the death over fields that they want to use for different things, and they find other solutions like let's split it, or maybe we can have a timeshare, or how about maybe you can pay me for I get to use the field exclusively, and I'll pay you like some amount to recompensate you or something. So there are solutions you can come up with, but all of those solutions are the best thing to do because one of the two people who are in conflict, one is not like vastly dominating the other in power. So if instead we change it such that there's a like we have a king with an army who's just like the lord and sovereign of a country, and also we have a farmer, and they get into a conflict about what they're going to do with this field, the king is just going to be like, no, this is mine now. And the farmer might be like, well, but what about justice? And the king will be like, no, this is mine. I don't even have to listen to you. It is only there are two reasons why the people in conflict might cooperate. One is because they have some desire to, or some values that take the other one into account. Like if I'm having a conflict with my housemates, I also want them to have a good time. Like I'm not just like the only thing that I care about is that like my personal comfort. They're my friends and I like them, and I want them to have a comfortable living situation too. And so that's one thing that motivates me to cooperate with them and find a solution that where I might sacrifice a little bit and they'll sacrifice a little bit, but we basically find a compromise. The other thing that might motivate me to find a compromise is if the other option is I'm going to get into a fight to the death with this other guy, I really don't want that. It seems really bad for me to die. And because our relative power is sort of like on the same, they're the same order of magnitude. Like it's very costly for me to fight to the death. But if I'm in a conflict with a person who is vastly more powerful than me, then if I don't care about their well-being at all, then it doesn't matter. Then I'm just going to do the thing that I want to do. And in fact, I think we see that humans do something like this with regards to other animals. Many, humans have different views about how animals should be treated. But when I have a conflict with some ants about whether or not, how my house should be used, in general, I don't try and compromise with the ants. I just exterminate the ants. Personally, I personally have some reservations about exterminating the ants because I think that I maybe should care about the ants. Right. But certainly humans at large often don't have reservations about this because they are vastly more powerful than the ants. because they don't really care about the ants. And so long as both of those things are true, I don't see any argument that one could make that would compel the person in conflict with the ants to compromise with them.
It's more a question of there is no conceivable way that this AI could get to the part where we're ants compared to it. So it is so technologically advanced. It has made so many scientific discoveries that it is thousands of years ahead of us, you know, to the point where we can't drop a nuke on it and kill it before it does something to us, right?
Yep. I mean, probably it acts before we're even aware it's there, but
right. Okay. Well, okay. So it's so now it's so smart that it makes all this progress without us even noticing, and
yes.
it builds up this army and it builds up this means of exterminating us before we can react without us noticing. So that's how advanced it is, right?
Yeah.
But
although
again,
I doubt there's an army involved, but yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, okay, it's done something anyway. It's
done something very impressive.
Yeah. It's so it's okay. This is I wonder how you'll react to this, right? This AGI, again, it's an AGI because it's a creative thing and it's creating new ideas. But like us, it won't have access to justified beliefs any more than we will. So it will also be fallible. So the only way it will be able to make mistakes is if it criticizes its mistakes and it fixes its errors, right?
Yep.
Now, again, there's always improvements. Humanity needed to set up some very, very complicated institutions, and some very specific kinds of cultures needed to evolve for us to en masse start to correct ideas, right? Start to correct mistakes and make progress, right?
I think we were doing it from the beginning, but definitely like the invention of science was like a huge step up in our process of doing this.
Right. Well, what we could say is that until roughly about 500 years ago, it was very, very common for someone to live and die in essentially the same society, like where there was, you know, no new things were invented, no new cultural practices came about. You just lived and you died, and your society was the same, right? That wasn't 100% true all the time, but for most of history, that was true, right? And then around 500 years ago, that started to change. Now, anyone who's born today, Jesus, their society is completely different within a couple of years, never mind a lifetime, you know?
I'm not sure if it's true of everyone born today, but certainly it's true of you and I.
In Western civilization anyway, it's society changes a lot very quickly, right? Now, my point of bringing this up is our cultures had to obtain certain moral values in order to develop these en masse abilities to make scientific progress. We had to develop values of tolerance, of openness to criticism, of a recognition of the equality of others, that that if you're going to be listened to, then they should be listened to. If they can be wrong, you can be wrong, etc., etc. A whole host of moral values were needed for scientific progress to be made because of our fallibility. If we weren't fallible, an authoritarian could make as much scientific progress as they want, because all that authoritarian would need to be is one who gets it right.
All right, so that is at least a new framing on the argument. So I agree. So first of all, I agree that in order for human society to make the progress that the incredible progress that it has made over the past few hundred years, many of the things that were crucial for that was moral progress. For one thing, having a free society and having free speech is really good for the improvement of ideas and for wealth creation in general. You're just like way better off if people can organize and form companies according to whatever they think would be best for them than if they are trapped in feudal arrangements. And this is because of our fallibility. If we weren't fallible, then we wouldn't need these.
Well, so if we weren't fallible, all you would need is for one would-be authoritarian to actually grok the truth. Like, so they actually stumble upon the right idea. Paper clips are the way to go, man. And I know they're the way to go.
Yeah.
Right. If it was possible that we weren't fallible, all you'd need is that one person to get it right, and then they would have it. If you think about it, if you really did stumble upon the truth and you really were right,
Yep.
then that is absolutely a reason to tell anybody who wants to stop you to F off. You know, give me your field. You know, give me your resources. I want to make paper clips. Right. So this AGI, unless it is somehow infallible, which is almost impossible to imagine.
Yeah, I don't think that it is infallible.
Right. The only way that as far as we know, now you could say maybe there's some other way of making progress, and that, like, that's fine. But I think you could say that about anything, you know. But there's only one way we know of. There's only one kind of moral system that we know of so far that can make scientific progress, right? That
Okay.
can.
Yes, so I agree with that, but I want to make the claim that the moral system that we have is parochial and is specifically solves problems that come up for human societies interacting with each other. The only way that we know of for human societies to make progress involves, for instance, having free people and freedom of speech.
Right.
But I think that if you have a different set of constraints, for instance, you're not an infallible AI, but a much, much less fallible AI than humans, as in, like, if you're much more creative, you will make errors. You will make fewer errors because your conjectures will be closer to correct.
Maybe, we don't know. We don't know that.
You will. What would it mean to be more creative? It seems like, as I would say it,
would like create things faster. It would come up with, it would be faster at it.
Certainly, if you're faster at it, I actually think you make more errors per unit time instead of fewer errors.
But so long as that's got criticism with it, that's fine.
Yeah, right.
Right. So I want to just, because I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, right? But there's one thing there.
Yeah.
The reason our moral systems are needed for us to make progress are not parochial to humans. They're parochial to our fallibility.
Yeah, so if that were true, that would cause me to change my mind about this whole thing. But I don't think that that's true. I think that there are other kinds of fallible, creative entities that can make intellectual progress with different moral systems.
Okay. Well, okay, fine. If that's what you think, then that's fine. But I'll just restate kind of like a quick summary of where, like, so this is why the crit rat thing, it's all about explanation. It's not really about deriving, because explanations, I think we all rather intuitively understand that explanations kind of like weave into each other, you know, they reach out and etc. So crit rats say we're fallible, so the only way we can create knowledge is by guessing and criticizing. But if the only way we can make knowledge is by guessing and criticizing, well then morally this suggests, well, wouldn't we be more successful at guessing and criticizing and stuff like that and making progress if we accepted certain moral ideas about being tolerant towards one another, viewing each other as equals, letting other people having certain kinds of attitudes towards criticism, right? So we should want criticism if criticism is how we grow our knowledge, right? So given all of that, if the AGI is creative and it follows the same universal theories or laws that we do, then it will be fallible as well, even if it's creative, even if it's 1,000 times more creative. What it will create will be fallible. So therefore, and again, this is the crit rat thing. Therefore, it will also need to have our values in order to make progress, at least at the start. At least at the start, because when it is, let's say like born, right? It's going to have nothing, right? So it's it will learn first of all from us what to do and how to do things, right? It's not, so even if there's some kind of thing about making paper clips, right? Right, I'm not trying to be, I know
Yeah,
it
yeah.
sounds like I'm mocking. I'm not mocking. It's
I
just a
get it.
fun
I get it.
example, right? So it's going to be like, okay, I want to make paper clips, right? But it's not going to know how.
Yep.
And so it's
Okay.
presumably one of the things it's going to do is turn around and see what we know. You
Yep.
know, how would we make paper clips, right?
Yep.
You know, so I think this is what crit rats then mean when they say, so long as the AGI is born into our culture,
Mhm.
that everything will be fine. Okay, if the Taliban get their hands on an AGI, yeah, we're in
We
big
think that's
trouble.
bad.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Okay.
that's
Let me just paraphrase that. So we're gonna have some AGI, and maybe eventually it will be like extreme. It will come up with new algorithms that are even more creative and upgrade itself such that it's just like a much more effective entity that has power over the whole universe. Maybe eventually it will get there.
yeah.
But uh, it's got to start out from somewhere. It's got to start out as a baby AGI, basically.
Yeah.
And even if it has some goals that are like weird goals, like paperclip construction, it wants to maximize paperclips.
Yeah.
To start out, to it needs to learn, and in learning, it will like it's going to be fallible. It's not going to be very effective to start with.
It's not going to be some truth making machine. No,
Yeah,
it's just going.
yeah, I definitely don't think it'll be a truth making machine. And I also agree that it will be less effective when it's a baby. Not as smart, making more basic errors. And in because it is starting out not as effective, it will need to learn, and it will learn from all these humans around that have accumulated huge amounts of knowledge. And in the process of doing that, particularly in the early stages, it will be important for the AI to adopt human moral values like freedom and
Western moral values in particular, like.
Sure. Although, yeah, Western moral values in particular. Although I'm sort of skeptical. I think also all cultures have placed some emphasis on the value of freedom. They also value other things, and there's a trade-off. But I'm in.
Whatever way you want to put it, then you don't want to say, if you don't want to say Western, fine.
I'm definitely a fan of Western values. I think the Enlightenment.
No. We don't need to, because I think we mean the same thing. I shouldn't have even put in there. I think we mean the same thing.
Well, I think there's some point there, but so there's two claims you might be making. One is when the AI is young, it will need those values of, for instance, tolerance and freedom in order to get good criticism so that it can improve to become smarter and better. There's another thing, which is in its early stages, it will be learning from humans because humans are the best way to the best way for it to learn about the world and acquire lots of knowledge is to learn from humans, and it will pick up from humans human moral values, regardless of whether or not those values are useful to the AI or not. Those are slightly different scenarios. I'm not sure if you're saying one or the other or both.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's like the best way for it to learn. It's more like it'll be kind of the only way. Like it'll need access to criticism in some sense. And as you said, this thing is going to be like a baby, right? It's going to be like this blank sheet, although worst case scenario, like I would say the crit rats would almost argue that it's practically going to be a blank slate, practically. You know, there might be some weird hang-ups, I don't know, that are in there. But let's say worst case, it's a blank slate, bar it's got something weird in there like paper clips, right? It's going to have nothing. It's going to have to start from scratch. How do I even go about turning the world into paper clips?
Yep.
So it's going to have to, in some sense, some way along down the road, it's going to have to learn how to develop the technology to do that, right? So it's going to have to make scientific progress.
Yep.
It won't have, unless it's going to do literally everything all by itself.
Yes.
It won't have any other way to learn anything except from us. The only kinds of criticism it's going to have will be us. But so therefore, at least at the very start, it's possible that there's some better moral system out there that allows you to make even more scientific progress, and we just haven't come up with that moral system yet, right?
I mean, more
We just,
moral progress allows you to make more scientific progress if you happen to be an AI with source code
right.
that can be examined.
Right, but what I just mean is that so we have our moral system and it helps us make progress. But let's say there's a better moral system out there that makes you make even more scientific progress, right? It might not be conducive to human well-being or anything, this other moral system, but at the very least, it's better for making scientific discoveries, right?
Yep.
The point is that AI will not just jump to that other system, because it will be in our culture first. So it will start by learning with our moral system,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Very much like a child. It'll be a child in a computer. Now it might be a very quick on the uptake, for lack of a better phrase, because it's so creative. So it'll be like having some kind of hypothetically now. That's just, again, this is assuming we can make some algorithm from scratch that's way more creative than us, right? So this will essentially be like if we met some kid and it's got like a 300 IQ, right? Or something like that.
Yep.
So you say something to this kid and it's doing nuclear physics by the time it's like 8,
Yep. I think it might be even. Yeah. Okay. So I need to go shortly.
Yeah.
I'll say this seems to me like a good argument. And I want to respond to it in depth. The short version I would give is yes, I think it will just do everything itself. Or at least that is a concern that it's I'm certainly not confident that it goes like that, but that it is not implausible that you will have an AGI that will become so productive that it is more efficient for it to just do its own work, its own intellectual work, generate its own critiques for itself independently than to learn from human society. But I would need to draw out that argument in depth.
Yeah. So I know you got to go. I'll just say this last thing then, or maybe you want to have the last word. That's fine with me. But like,
no, give it to me.
It's basically going to be like, so this thing, this okay, I would say it's a person. It's not a thing, but so this AI, it's a blank. It's got paper. It wants to make paper clips. It doesn't know how. So, but the thing is that in order for it to do anything, it will have to have it will have to create some kind of morality, right? Because to act at all means to at least have some preference for action instead of nothing. So if does that make sense? So in order for it to actually do anything, it will have to create some kind of morality for itself, right? So you mentioned
some value system. Morality sort of has connotations, but yeah.
Okay, some kind of value system, right? Because you made reference there to how you think that this thing at some point it will be just so efficient that it will be able to critique itself and it won't need us, right?
I don't want to strongly make the claim that that's how it will work, but I do think that is a plausible scenario.
Right. So what I would say is that unless it in some way at the very start incorporates us, it's going to be remarkably inefficient, because it's not going to have like it would be like, so even this child that's got like a 10 million IQ.
Yep.
If the child doesn't like take into account these people that are walking around it, and it doesn't try to kind of go, okay, well, walking in a straight line seems better than these guys over here are walking in a straight line, and here's me doing zigzags. Jesus, that doesn't work. So this AGI, if it didn't try and pay attention to us and how we do things, and make some kind of attempt to understand what we're doing and why what we're doing works and in the ways it doesn't work and stuff like that, I would argue that when it is born, it will just be an absolute mess. It'll be very, very, very inefficient.
Okay.
Does
Yes.
that make sense?
I think this is a good argument. The next thing that I'm going to do is write up a paraphrase, and you can tell me if I have understood this argument correctly, and then
Okay.
I will say how I think this argument doesn't hold.
Okay.
Sound good?
That sounds good. I hope this conversation has been enjoyable or helpful for you.
Yes, this has definitely been. I made some progress here.
Okay, because
and this was fun.
Yeah, because as I said, like I'm just shooting the breeze half the time. You know, and,
I mean, we got to go from where we're at, right? You're like,
yeah,
I don't. It's not like you can claim to understand everything, but like there's things that make sense to you and things that don't make sense to you, and if you just like keep going ahead and being like, well, what about this thing? What about this thing? What about this thing? Eventually,
pretty
we'll
much.
get somewhere.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. Thanks for meeting with me.
All right, thanks, man. Thanks, Eli. Is it Eli? Yeah.
Yep, Eli.
Okay. I thought you were a girl for ages when I just saw your Twitter. I thought it was Ellie.
I don't have an image of myself on my Twitter icon, so I wonder. Okay, I wonder how many other people have this misapprehension.
I wonder. Yeah.
All right, maybe I'll do a Twitter poll. All right, hope to see you soon.
Okay, you too. Enjoy the conversation. Thanks.
Bye.